Hi, this is Ray from IELTS Focus, and in this lesson I want to look at IELTS Speaking Part 3, and there's 7 types of questions that could come up in that part of the test. So it's 7 common question types, and we're going to look at the types of grammar that you may need to respond to these kind of questions, and also some sample responses. Now there's a pattern to the type of questions that tend to come up in Part 3. You may have to state an opinion or make a prediction or talk about other people in society that is, or compare and contrast and make comparisons of the past and the present, talking about cause and effect and answering a hypothetical question. So it depends on how you actually answer the question with the right or the relevant grammar. Now the first one is language needed for stating an opinion. So most people will introduce their opinion with "I think," but there are other better ways to express an opinion. Now these are informal and they shouldn't be used in the writing section. So you could say, as far as I'm concerned, or if you ask me, I think, or to be honest, I think, or I reckon. Now in some cases you may want to contrast your opinion with the general opinion or public opinion. So you could say, many people would say, it is often said, or it is widely believed. Let's take a look at an example question. Now this is a response to a question based on the topic of education, and this is only for example purposes, so don't just memorize this. Education is quite a common topic in IELTS, and of course you must give detail and you must give an example in part 3 of the IELTS speaking. So questions: what do you think about the way languages are taught in schools? So as far as I'm concerned, the methods used to teach foreign languages in schools are in need of improvement. Teachers need to engage students more with interesting materials, fun activities, or real-life conversations in that language. It is widely believed that teaching just grammar or lecture-based lessons are not effective, and I agree with this. For example, when I was in school, I didn't like French or French class, and the teacher just lectured us, and there were no fun group activities. So in this response, I've clearly given my opinion as far as I'm concerned. I've contrasted it with the public general opinion, and I've given an example. Now, of course, your ideas can be very straightforward. You don't have to use really complex, high-level, smart ideas. You just have to answer the question directly. The examples you give, they don't have to be true. You can make them up. Actually, the example I gave here is true. I didn't like French class. So that's one way of answering this kind of question, and that kind of length of response is quite normal for IELTS Part 3. Now, if you don't know, you should never say, I don't know, because that will really affect your overall fluency score. Usually in IELTS, the questions are pretty straightforward, and you should be able to answer them with some kind of opinion or some idea. Now you can say, for example, to be honest, I haven't really thought about it, but I reckon, or it's not something I've considered, but I guess, and actually I'm not sure. However, I'd say, and then you can go on and give some kind of opinion. So although you state that you don't know, you can still offer some kind of opinion or some kind of response, and that will improve your overall fluency. It's important for overall fluency anyway. So never say that you don't know. Now, if you want to give a strong opinion, you can say, I'm firmly convinced, or I strongly believe, or I'm absolutely certain. Okay, let's move to the next one, which is making a prediction. When presented with a question about the future, you can use will and verb, but there's other patterns you can use when you want to state some kind of prediction about what could happen. You could say, the way I see it is, or there is a strong possibility, or it's highly likely, or it's unlikely that. Most probably I would say, it has long been predicted, it's not very likely, and I can definitely see, etc. So like the question would be, will computers and robots replace teachers in the future? So again, it's on the topic of education. If technology continues to progress at this pace, then it's highly likely that teachers in the classroom will be replaced by computers or robots in the future. Now in this response, it's a little bit short, but I've used a conditional, I've used the word if, and I've put highly likely and will be. Let's look at a little bit of a longer response to this kind of question. So I reckon it's highly likely that robots and computers will be used in schools rather than teachers. If technology continues to progress at this pace, then I can definitely see that teachers in the classroom will not be needed in the future. For instance, I recently read a report in the Guardian newspaper that Japan is planning to put robots in English classrooms to help pupils with their pronunciation. So yes, there's a strong possibility that computers and robots will be doing the job of a teacher within 10 years. Now in this response, I've given an example. You should be giving an example on every response in part 3. It's actually a true example, this one, because I did read this report recently. So as I say, it doesn't have to be true. You can make it up, but you have to choose at least one main idea, one main example, and develop that. There's no point in giving loads of different examples. Just choose one theme and develop it. And you can see the way I've used the language, highly likely. I can definitely see a strong possibility. So when you answer the question, you just need to use the appropriate grammar for that question. You don't have to use loads and loads of different grammatical structures in your answer. It's actually quite simple and quite straightforward. Now, next type of question is talking about other people. So often you'll get this kind of question in IELTS. And usually when we answer this kind of question, we need to talk about people in society or in our society. A common mistake is to talk about your own experience here or someone in your family. For example, do people in your country spend a lot of money on their education? So to answer this, you have to use the word people and you have to talk about people. So the majority of people in my country spend a lot of money in their education, or most people would prefer to develop their education by going to a good university, or a lot of people feel people in the past used to, so I'm comparing the past there. In general, most people tend to, the word tend to is useful. So let's look at an example response. So I'd say that the majority of people spend a lot on education. Traditionally, in my country, studying hard to get into a good university is considered to be very important. For instance, most people want to get a job as a doctor or some other high-paying profession. Therefore, many people tend to see investing in their education as a big priority. Now, in this response, I've used the word people 3 times. There's no rule to that, but I've just done that. But I've answered the question appropriately. And again, I've given another example. Now, of course, these are only examples, and you should never memorize responses. There's so many different ways to respond to this kind of question. It's down to, your own ideas. So the 4th type of question is comparing and contrasting. So in this case, we'd use the grammar of comparatives and superlatives. So comparing 2 things or 2 people, or more than 2 things and 2 people. And these are the kind of grammar structures that you would use. It's pretty straightforward. You could probably look up the grammar rules for this online if you wanted a grammar lesson on that. Another pattern is using as, adjective as. Like A is not as cheap as B, not as interesting as B, etc. So that's the kind of grammar you would need for this kind of question. What's the difference between studying online and studying at a school, like a language school, for example? So studying on the internet, such as an online course, is more effective than studying at a school because you can focus more without the distractions of being in a class. You can also study at your own pace. And with recent advances in technology, it's often much cheaper to study online than at school, for example, a language school. For instance, if you want to learn English, it will be more expensive to enroll in a school than taking one-to-one Skype lessons or studying with YouTube videos. Now, in this response, I've used comparative, more effective, much cheaper and more expensive, and I've used the phrase for instance to introduce my example. Okay, next one is making comparisons now with the past. Now, when comparing with the past, you can use comparatives and superlatives with the past simple or the past continuous, where you can use used to, present perfect continuous, and the present perfect. Now, the present perfect links the past to the present moment. So here are some example sentences. For example, used to, universities used to be free in the UK, but now students are getting into debt. The quality of teaching has become much better compared to 50 years ago. So I'm using the phrase compared to a time in the past. And I've got the present perfect and a superlative there. Present perfect continuous, education has been getting more expensive over the past 20 years. Past simple, pretty straightforward. Teaching was a well-paid profession in the past, but nowadays, so nowadays indicates now, recently, it has one of the lowest salaries. So again, I'm using a superlative. Well, past continuous, truancy was becoming a big problem when I was at school, although these days it seems to not be such an issue. Let's look at an example question and response. So how are education priorities today different than those in the past? Okay, many years ago teaching was about rote learning and the pupils used to listen to the teacher in a lecture format. In recent years, in the Western world especially, there's been more of a focus on individualism and critical thinking skills. For example, when I was at school, I remember the teacher was writing up stuff on the board, the blackboard, and there was no group discussion among the class. These days, the classroom is a very different place with better interaction, discussion, and the use of technology. So in this response, I've used the phrase many years ago and in recent years. I've given an example. I've used phrases like these days. You can use, was writing, used to. So I'm putting the past tense in there wherever I can, and the present tense, or the present perfect. So that would be an appropriate response to that kind of question. The sixth one is talking about cause and effect. So here are some example sentences of cause and effect. So pollution is a result of coal-fired power stations and CO2 from vehicles. Global warming is partly due to the burning of fossil fuels. Consequently, weather patterns have been changing worldwide. Many school children are doing badly at school. This is down to various issues such as bullying, boredom, poor teaching methods. As a result, the pupils are not getting the grades they need. So phrases like, as a result of, due to, consequently, etc. Owing to, because of, or is caused by, was caused by for the past tense, is down to, or this can be attributed to. This means that this is when we start to explain the cause. This means that consequently, as a result of this. Let's take a look at an example. What are some of the reasons for students doing badly in school? I feel that this is down to a number of issues. Among these are bullying, poor teaching methods, boredom and lack of motivation. This means that many students are not getting the grades they need to enter university. For instance, when I was in school, I had to study geography and science, but I had no interest in those subjects. As a result, I lost motivation when studying these, so I ended up with poor grades. Okay, let's look at the last type of question. These are hypothetical questions, and these are if questions. So it's asking about an unreal or an imaginary situation, and they'll use the second conditional. For example, if you could go back to university again, what would you study? So you can reply with a if plus could plus would statement. For instance, if I could go back to university again, I'd study business. One reason for this is that running a business is the most useful skill to have in society now. If I had the chance, I'd like to do an MBA and learn about corporate business practice, then set up my own company. Now in this response, I've used two conditional sentences. Again, there's no rule. There's no specific rule to that. It's down to how you feel about it. And I've explained my reason. I've given one reason for this is, so I'm explaining. So that would be an appropriate response to that kind of question. Now, one key point here is that although grammar is very important, don't go into this speaking exam thinking that grammar is all there is, because you're being tested on fluency and vocabulary and pronunciation. And don't be afraid to make small mistakes. In fact, you can still get a band 7 even if you make a few small grammar mistakes here and there. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. But the point is you should be answering the questions according to a particular grammar point, not having loads of different structures in your answer, different grammar structures. So as I say, if it's a hypothetical question, just answer it with a hypothetical sentence. So let's just briefly go over some top tips. So you have to be able to talk at length, and most importantly, explain and develop your answer in part 3 of the IELTS Speaking. Explain one main idea or example and develop that rather than giving lots of different examples. If possible, get feedback from a teacher who can pinpoint any issues and give you some advice. And of course, you can practice at home by getting an IELTS speaking test, maybe from an IELTS, Cambridge IELTS book, IELTS 12, IELTS 13. You can record your answers on your smartphone, then play back the recording and make a note of the mistakes and the weak areas and do it regularly. Do this regularly and you'll make a lot of improvements. So thanks for watching. And if you head over to IELTSfocus.com, we've got one-on-one speaking mock practice tests online, and there's also a writing correction service. Or if you have any questions, put them in the comments below this video. Okay, thanks a lot.